Jay, are you ready to rock and roll?
I'm always ready to rock and roll.
Lena, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. We are thrilled to have you here on this special evening as we get ready for John Lennon's 82nd birthday. I can't believe it because to me, he just seems like that 20-year-old rocker that Patti Singer walked up to me and showed me that 45 and told me I had till recess to fall in love with one of the Beatles. And I have to tell you, as a funny side story, Patti Singer, I looked for her for years and years and years and years and years, and I recently found her. And tomorrow we are going to speak in person for the first time since the 6th grade. But if it hadn't been for her, I never would have found the Beatles. But John is getting ready to celebrate his 82nd. What a wonderful week. And he always said that you are never gone, you're never dead until the last person who remembers you says your name for the last time. And we are going to say his name many, many times tonight. So he is definitely still living, still very much a presence in our world. And I'm Jude Southerland Kessler. I am a John Lennon biographer. I've written the John Lennon series. Well, I've written the first 5.5 books in the series and getting ready to go for part 2 of volume 5, headed toward 9 volumes. So spent the last 36 years trying to tell John's life story. And so wonderful tonight to be able to combine our She Said podcast along with the Focal Points webinar, put them together into one for an evening that I don't think you are ever going to forget. We are so thrilled to have with us this evening John's attorney in the Roots trial against Morris Levy, and the author of a wonderful, and I mean it's a gem of a book entitled Lennon, the Mobster, and the Lawyer. And we're going to introduce him in just a minute. Lena is holding it up. And Lena, tell us about yourself.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Lena Stagg. I'm the author of the Recipe Records series of rock and roll themed cookbooks. They are designed to bring some fun and a little bit of rock and roll into your kitchen. So it's designed to bring people together to enjoy music and trivia for wonderful artists, especially the Beatles. My rock and roll Beatles cookbook is called Recipe Records, a culinary tribute to the Beatles. And it contains recipes such as strawberry pie forever, with a wonderful strawberry pie recipe submitted by Jude Kessler. And She Said banana bread. And my favorite, I Am the Eggs Man. So it's a delightful book. And we're going to be giving away a copy of this book that's tonight. So hang on to your hats. So in a little while, we'll have trivia and you'll have the opportunity to get a copy of this book. I did see on the chat, Jude, that Carol Guestwire said that her chat does not work.
We got Jeff Emmerich working on it right now.
Okay.
He's sitting here working on it. So give us just a minute. Rand Kessler, i.e. Jeff Emmerich, is working on it. You guys, Recipe Records has graciously consented to be our sponsor for tonight's show. And this is as the book that she's giving away. But there's so many great books. There's the 60s edition that has all those recipes that your mama used to make back in the 1960s. And then there's the Rolling Stones, Let's Spin the Bite Together. And the Bad Boy, these are your bad boy recipes.
Okay,
and
then
chat is on, guys. Jeff Emmerich has it fixed. Thank you, honey. Thank you very much. This is the classic, the Recipe Records original book that has music. Uh-oh.
Tom Aguiar.
Can you still see me, Lena?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and I can't see the screen, but that's okay. Rand can get it back for me. But this book has music from the 1950s up to the 1990s and recipes and there we go, and music history. So check those out. And thank you, Lena, for being our sponsor for the show tonight. Now we have I mean, we've had some great guests and we've been blessed. I mean, we got to speak with John's sister, Julia Baird, last year, and Rogue Best, and the Beatles' first bass player, Chaz Newby. And we've just had some wonderful guests, but I don't know when I've been more excited to have someone on, because this person not only is a man that John respected and trusted and became a part of his inner circle of friends, but he really stepped up and rescued John at a time when something was going on in his professional career that truly upset John. John was very meticulous about the way that his work was handled and prepared and displayed to the public. And we'll learn more about what happened in just a few minutes. But in 1973, our guest tonight got a case that involved John Lennon and became a very important part of his life. He was an extremely successful Park Avenue, New York attorney who had handled major cases. For example, he was the one asked to do the salary arbitration for Major League Baseball for the Cincinnati Reds and the New York Yankees, the Cleveland Indians, and the San Francisco Giants. I mean, that is very, very big league. But he was also, for you Dylan fans, the person who was asked to represent Albert Grossman, Bob Dylan's first manager, in the litigation between Grossman and Dylan. So, I mean, that in itself is huge. And listen up, because you might need to know this later. He represented Terry Knight, the founder and the manager of Grand Funk Railroad, when litigation cropped up between the band and Terry Knight. So what a perfect person to be able to represent John Lennon. And when I was getting ready to meet him at the Fest for Beatles fans, I was a little bit nervous because I thought, oh my goodness, I hope I don't say anything amiss. This is a Park Avenue attorney. Turned out to be one of the sweetest, nicest, most down-to-earth people in the world. Lanea and I are just thrilled to introduce to you the one and only Jay Bergen. Yay!
Thank you very much, Jude and Lanea. It's a thrill to be here. I've been looking forward to this since you issued the invitation. Oh, I don't know, it was back in August, I think. So I've been looking forward to it very much. I consider myself, people ask me, well, what did you do when you were, before you were retired? And I said, well, now I'm a recovering lawyer.
That is.
So I might have been a lawyer on Park Avenue at one point, but that's way in the past. And I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you.
You're a great author as well. I mean, really, your book reads nothing like court documents. I myself am a paralegal in the past, and I've read a lot of court documents. And this book is a fascinating, it's a great read. It's a riveting read. So I have to tell everyone that my first exposure to this book was as an audiobook. I got in Messenger one night a note from Scott McKinley saying, I'm attaching a free audio file for you to listen to of a new book. And I get a lot of those, and some of them are okay. I was out watering the flowers one night. I had my phone with me and I had downloaded it, and I started to listen, and I was hooked. I carried that phone with me everywhere I went. I had a hard time sleeping. Well, I always have a hard time sleeping, but I have a really hard time sleeping because I was so into this book. I listened to it 3 times on the audio on Audible. And then I purchased, someone says the book was awesome. I couldn't put it down. Yes, I love Jay's book. It is a great book. And then I ordered the book and started making notes in the book. So it is really great. And I highly recommend that everyone get both the Audible and the book. And because Scott brought it to life, you'll love both of them. But one note that was in Bob Gruen's foreword was this sentence. He said, Jay had a long, successful career, but most people want to know about the case he handled for the most famous member of the most famous band in the world. Now, the latter part of that sentence is going to be what we're going to really talk about tonight. But let's first go back to the first part of that sentence, Jay's long, successful career. I just gave the highlights, Jay, of your career, and I'm sure there are other wonderfully fascinating cases. What stands out in your mind besides John's trial? What other cases stand out in your mind?
Well, I thought of something just, my memory, kind of popped up something just a few days ago. And I remembered in 1964, when I had only been practicing law with a law firm on Wall Street, Donovan, Leisure, Newton, and Irvine, that I became involved in my first music case. And the piece of music was the song from Mary Poppins, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
Really? What was the case there?
Two songwriters named Gloria Parker and Barney Young claimed that they had coined the word supercalifragilisticexpialidocious and wrote a song about it years and years before. And they tried to get an injunction stopping the release of Mary Poppins in 1964. And I was one of the very young associates on this case. I found, and one of the other associates found, we were able to find and trace the song back to the early 1930s, because it was a song that the word was used in kids' summer camps. And the Sherman brothers, who wrote the music for Mary Poppins, they were in a summer camp and they wrote a song about supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and they wrote the music for Mary Poppins. And so I was on the case where the plaintiffs, these two songwriters, were denied the right to stop the release of Mary Poppins, and they ultimately lost the lawsuit.
So is it kind of like if you use Q-tip too much, then they can't use that as a brand name anymore because it's become part of the vernacular? Was that what they?
Yeah, that was one of the it was one of the points, because the firm I was with did a lot of work for the Disney Corporation, who had produced and released the film. But I went on from there, as you pointed out, to represent Terry Knight and Grand Funk Railroad. And I remember that in kind of October or November of 1972, the band played in Madison Square Garden. And the next day, the Saturday, I took Donnie Brewer's deposition in the case. And that was my first instance of getting involved in that case. And I kind of handled the case for the next year and a half until it was finally settled.
Wow. That's amazing. Lanea,
settled very favorably to Terry Knight.
Wow. Lanea is a music expert, so I know she's interested in that.
I saw Grand Funk Railroad recently, actually. I don't know how many of the original members are still in it, but let's backtrack just a little bit, Jay, a few years. And you had actually met John Lennon in person in New York on another occasion. I think, in fact, perhaps barring Shea Stadium, it was the single most dramatic night of John and the Beatles' career. Tell us where you first encountered John.
At the Forest Hills Stadium, which was part of the Forest Hills Tennis Club in Queens. That's where the U.S. Open was played every year before they built the big stadiums where it's played now. And I got 2 tickets, and my wife at the time and I went. It was August 28th, 1964. And the Beatles landed on one of the back tennis courts, because it was basically a tennis club. So there were a number of courts, but the concert was going to be in the main stadium, which seated about 16,000 people, I believe. And the Beatles landed on one of the back tennis courts in a helicopter. So that was the first time. That was when I saw them, and I think that was their first, other than the Ed Sullivan Show, their first live performance in New York City.
That's crazy.
It was just a night of nights. I think of all of the nights, and all of you Beatles fans who really know their performances. I don't know if any of you were actually there, but to watch that helicopter slowly descending while thousands of flash bulbs are popping, and they're looking down at this sea of faces, looking up at them and screaming. And it was this, young guys descending from the sky kind of thing. It was, what a night. It was one of the biggest nights the Beatles ever had, and you were there, Jay.
Yeah, it was quite a night. It was a special night. Yeah.
That's
and the
tremendous.
tickets were only I think between $3 and $7, depending on, where you were seating.
It's amazing.
That's crazy. So you were truly a fan of the Beatles and John.
Well, and
From
it was shortly after that my wife and I saw A Hard Day's Night at the Fabian's Fox in downtown Brooklyn, which was one of these big old Art Deco theaters at the time. And I remember walking back to our apartment, I said to her, these guys they're for real. That was a very clever, very funny movie. And with, of course, as we all know, they wove the songs into the film beautifully.
Great movie.
They did. So if we skip ahead now, it's February in New York. It's cold. It's 1973. And you come into work one day and you're approached by someone who tells you that you are going to manage a case involving some litigation that John Lennon is facing, and something that has happened to him. Tell us, because even after doing 36 years of research on John, this was not something that I knew a lot about. So even though we've got lots of great Beatles experts here, Jay, tell us a little bit about the background of that case.
Well, my partner at the time, a senior partner, David Dalginus, was representing John in connection with the dissolution of the Beatles partnership. And I had handled a couple of really minor matters for John. And this morning, this February 3rd, David asked me to come down to his office. He asked me to go to a meeting at Capitol Records that afternoon at 5:00, and that there was some talk about a bootleg John Lennon album about to be released by somebody named Morris Levy. I didn't know anything about Morris Levy, although David filled me in later on and basically told me that he was a mobster, a gangster, tied up with the mafia. But I went to the meeting. There were two lawyers who did a lot of work for Capitol Records in New York there, and one lawyer from the headquarters in Los Angeles. And they were starting to fill me in on what they had heard, and the conference room door opened, and in walked John Lennon. And I had no idea he was going to be there. I'm not even sure that the Capitol lawyers did. David didn't warn me, so I don't think he knew either. So after the initial shock, we introduced ourselves, and John started filling us in on what he knew about what was happening, and how he had mistakenly given Morris Levy in November of 1964, just a few months before that, a rough mix of the rock and roll album that he had started recording in 1973 with Phil Spector in Los Angeles. And at one point, Capitol's lawyers asked me about getting an injunction to stop Levy. And I said, I really think that's a mistake. It may be hard to get an injunction. But the other thing is that, whoever fires the first shot in a lawsuit, you lose control. You don't know what's going to happen next. It's like a war.
They have the burden of proof.
Excuse me?
They have the burden of proof.
Yes. And
Huge burden.
So I said to John, how long will it take you to finish the album? and he said, I can do it in 2 days. So he went in on February 4th and February 5th, finished it, shipped it to Capitol. Morris Levy started advertising the what he called the Roots album. It was John Lennon sings the great rock and roll hits Roots. And he started advertising it that weekend, February 7th. Capitol came out with the official version on the 13th of February. And then Morris stopped the advertising. He had sold about, I think, 1,270 copies. And then about 2 weeks later, he filed the first lawsuit, claiming basically that John and he had an oral agreement to sell the album on TV for $4.98.
It's really fascinating. I looked at the album covers for both of the albums, and the Roots album just looks hideous. It's so hideous, and the Capitol album is very polished and very chic. That was really a brilliant move for you to push him to release that. I mean, how insightful.
Well, John said after I suggested, when can you finish it? He said, I'd rather finish it now. I'm really kind of sick of it. I've never had an album take this long, and I'd really just rather get it done. And remember, the Walls and Bridges album was only out from September, which he had recorded in the summer of 1974. So the two albums were kind of bumping up against each other, but Capitol didn't think they had any choice.
Right. So as these initial meetings began to take place, you had a very unique experience in you were called to the Dakota to meet Yoko Ono. Tell us about that meeting and what took place.
Well, John called me one day in March. This was after the second lawsuit was filed. Another one, they filed a second lawsuit in federal court, and he asked me to come up and meet Yoko the next day. And I said to him, fine, what should I bring anything? He said, no, Yoko just wants to meet you. So we met in this large living room in their apartment in the Dakota. She had read both of the complaints. And it was pretty obvious that Yoko was very smart. I mean, I knew something about her background as an artist and some of her artistic endeavors. And she asked a lot of very penetrating questions. She really had these questions about the case. She said, John and I are very concerned about this case. We want to keep down the amount of money that John's going to owe Morris Levy. And I said to her, well, if I have anything to say about it, he's not going to owe them Morris anything, because, I'm going to work as hard as I can on this. And finally, after an hour, I don't know, an hour and a half or whatever it was, she stood up and said, well, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. And I left. John was not at the meeting. I didn't see him. But this may sound like I was a little bit, more than a little bit naive, because I didn't realize until many, many, many years later that was an audition. I guess it was after I really realized how close the two of them were. And if she hadn't liked me, I would have been out.
That's true.
Right.
They would have gotten somebody else.
Yep. No doubt about it. Jay, people in the chat are asking some questions. And guys, you are going to get a chance in just a few minutes to ask questions directly of Jay. If you'll put them in the Q&A, if you go to the bottom of the screen, you'll see Q&A. And if you'll type your questions in there, we'll get to them in just a few minutes. But Jay, one thing that they're asking that goes with what we're talking about right now is, did you ever feel that you and John were in any physical danger because of Levy's associations with the mob?
No, it never came up. I mean, I learned some other things about Morris that could be frightening. but I just thought, and John and I never discussed it, I just thought that because of the high profile, John Lennon, federal court, that Morris wouldn't dare do anything. And I think Morris thought that by bringing these lawsuits, he'd be able to bully John, Capital, and EMI into some kind of a deal. Because Morris was a grifter. He was one of those people who, if there was a legal way to do something or an illegal way to do something, he'd always pick the illegal way.
Mhm.
He was a crook and a real con artist. So I think the whole thing really backfired on him, Jude and Lanea.
Yeah, not what he thought was going to happen at all. Well, to me, the most important part of this book, and I don't know how you guys who are listening feel, because many of you are saying that you've read it. I realized very early on that I was going to get something in this book that you never get. Never. Books always say new and never before seen photos. They're never new and they're never before seen. And they are, new information. It's not new information. It's the same information. This book has brand new information because John's court testimony is stuff that you have never heard before. And one of the things, Jay, that you guys talked about was the importance of John helping in the production of the record. He said that he and George Martin and the other Beatles worked together to produce their records, and it was very important to him. What did he say as he's giving his court testimony about how crucial it was for him to produce the records? Tell us what you remember about his opinion about that.
Well, I mean, John was a perfectionist. And I was able to use his testimony because I carried around with me through like 5 house moves over 40 years, 5 or 6 banker's boxes with the entire trial record of testimony. And I decided when I decided to write this book, because nobody had told the story about this period in John's life when he dropped out of the music business in early 1975, got back with Yoko, she got pregnant. This was a different John Lennon than a lot of people had written about and heard about. He was chilled out. He was happy, awaiting the birth of his the child that turned out to be Sean, and he was very involved in the two of us working together on the case. And I can actually read something about what he said about the sequencing of the albums.
I thought that was the most interesting part, the sequencing, how each song was important and where it went.
Well, just let me read you a few of his lines that are in the book, because I thought it was very important to put in the book some of his testimony. So I asked him, when you talk about the order, you are talking about the order of the songs in the album? Yes, I mean, it is one of the most painful processes, because sometimes you think you have a great track or song, and then you put it next to something and it sounds disgusting, and you have to go through the whole process again of maneuvering. It is like a jigsaw puzzle, only there is no set answer. Only you know the answer. So you can put the puzzle together and it seems to fit, but when you look at it, it is wrong. So you have to pull it apart again and do it again. And that was kind of his main discussion about that, about how not only was it important in terms of the sequence, Jude and Lanea, but also how far apart each song was.
Right.
On the record. And John also wanted his records to not be more than 20 minutes long on each side, because he wanted his albums to be loud. And it was proven to him early, I guess, in his career, that if you went beyond 20 minutes, the sound kind of began to fade.
Yeah, it's that I did not even know. That's something that I didn't know. And John Mazzini, you probably knew that already, Tom Aguiar, but that was something I did not know. And there was so much of what he said about how they would move songs around, listen to the sound. One song had to flow into the next. I mean, that was all new to me.
Well, and that's why I put it in the book, and it was very important to the judge, because the judge, turns out, as you found out when you read the book, was a classical musician who played the harpsichord, but he knew nothing about the Beatles or John Lennon. He had never listened to rock and roll, and we actually at one point brought in recording equipment from the record plant where John recorded a lot and played tracks from the two albums.
That's
That's
crazy.
terrific. That's terrific. So another extremely important part of your book is John's in-depth discussion about the importance of the songs on the rock and roll LP and what each song meant to him as a person, intimately. So what songs had meant so much to him that you explained in the book? I'll list out a couple of those. Bebopalula and Stand By Me. What were his thoughts on those?
It wasn't so much that I was explaining it in the book. He was explaining it, because I showed him Plaintiff's Exhibit 35, which is the rock and roll album, and can you tell the court whether you had any particular reasons for performing each one of the songs on the rock and roll album? Answer, yes, there is a pretty good reason for each one. Bebopalula was one of the first songs I ever learned, and I actually remember singing it the day I met Paul McCartney. I was singing at the church, and McCartney was in the audience. Stand By Me was one of my big albums in the dance halls in Liverpool. That was a Benny King number. And the same goes for Bebopalula. I knew these songs as a child. And then he went through the rest of them. Ready Teddy, You Can't Catch Me, Ain't That a Shame, Peggy Sue. He said, I have been doing that since it came out, and Buddy Holly did it. And in fact, I used to sing every song that Buddy Holly put out. And then he mentioned Bring It On Home to Me is one of my all-time favorite songs. And in fact, I have been quoted as saying, I wish I had written it. I love it that much, and I was glad to be able to do it. So he went through each one of the songs, Lanea, on the album, and explained how they were important to him.
What about Boney Maroney?
Including Boney Maroney, and here I'll quote again, was one of the very earliest songs along with Bebopalula. And I remember singing it the only time my mother saw me perform before she died. So I was hot on Boney Maroney. That is one of the reasons. Also, I liked Larry Williams, who recorded it.
It's
That's
priceless.
terrific.
That is
It
just,
is terrific.
I mean, you're getting it straight from him, what each of these songs meant. This is just, I mean, I was jumping up and down at that point.
Well, and I think, you can, aside from listening to Scott McKinley's wonderful Audible version, you as a reader, when you're reading it, you can almost picture John Lennon sitting on the witness stand saying these words.
Yeah.
It's very poignant, very poignant. So why was it so important for you to have John share this information with Judge Griese?
Well, because, Griese really wanted to know as much as he could about John's creative process. So it was important for John to explain, each one of these songs to the judge. And he went through every one of them. And the only one he said, John also had a good reason to include Just Because. He said Phil Spector talked him into it. But it was an important part of the proof of why John made this album in the first place.
Sure.
How long did you work on this case with John? How many months did you work together on this?
Well, it really wasn't that long because we started in talking about this in February of '75, and when they filed the federal court case, which I think was another way of Morris saying, "All right, you won't come to me and talk about a settlement. Now I'm going to sue you in federal court." That was the fatal mistake because cases in New York courts, the state courts, move very slowly. In the federal court in New York, and I'm sure in federal courts around the country, the cases are assigned to one judge by lot the day the case is filed, and that judge is in charge of the case for all purposes right through the trial. This case was assigned to Judge Lloyd McMahon, who had been on the bench for 16 years. I knew Judge McMahon. I knew what kind of a trial judge he was, and I knew this case was going to move very quickly. And we got to trial in 10 months, which is extraordinary.
Right. So, before you're going in front of these judges, you know all of them really before you knew their reputations.
Yeah.
What about Judge Griesay? Did you know Judge Griesay?
No, I didn't, because he'd only been on the bench 4 or 5 years. He was very young. He'd only been on the bench 4 or 5 years. And it was just a stroke of good fortune that he got the case. Because this happened after there was a mistrial on the second day of the trial before a jury, before Judge McMahon. But I knew that McMahon was not going to stand for any monkey business in the courtroom. He ran the trial. Yeah. The lawyers, you've got your role. My role is to run the trial and make sure it moves quickly, and we're not wasting a lot of time.
But to get a musician, a classical musician, and someone who knew the importance of music, like you say, what a gift, what a wonderful thing to work with Griesay, because he was so willing to listen and learn.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you look at the one photo in the book that Bob Gruen took in January of 1976, when the trial started, when he sneaked the camera into the courtroom and took a picture of John on the witness stand. We didn't have a jury. Both sides agreed to waive a jury in the second trial that started. And if you look carefully at the photo, you see John kind of pointing, looking directly at Judge Griesay, and Judge Griesay has his hand on his right side of his head, and he's looking directly at John. And standing in the middle of the picture is Mr. Shirtman, who was Morris Levy's lawyer, who kept jumping up and down, trying to interrupt these long colloquies between John and the judge, because he knew this ain't good. This is not going well.
This is not going in my favor. This is not working out well. Well, I won't give everything away because I want everybody really to get a copy of this book. You will treasure it and you will read it many times, because this, as I said, is new material. This is, I think about it as gold miners who are been mining and mining and mining and mining, and suddenly you strike a lode of gold and you're like, Eureka! So it's new material, but the end of the book is very touching as you tell it. You tell it so well. The thing to me that it really touched me about the book is that you can tell that you knew John not just as your client, but as a friend. And when you inscribed my book, you wrote to Jude, "This isn't a story about John Lennon, the person. This is a story about John Lennon, the person, not the man." You didn't know John the Beatle. You knew John, your friend, the person that you worked with on a daily basis. Tell us about that, John Lennon.
Well, he was not into the music business at the time, and he loved New York. John loved New York City. He could walk around most of the time. People would leave him alone. There's a great story where we were walking up Park Avenue one afternoon after his deposition, and this middle-aged woman stopped him and stopped right in front of him and said, "You're George Harrison." And he said, "Yes, I am." And, and then she walked on, and the two of us kept walking north on Park Avenue and started laughing out loud. But her mistake was that she should have asked him for an autograph. And I'm confident that he would have signed George Harrison.
I'm sure he would.
Because
That is
he had one rule when it came to autographs: not while I'm eating. I'll give you an autograph as soon as I'm finished eating. But he was a real person. He was funny. He had a great sense of humor. He was very shy. John did not like to tell people no. That's why Morris Levy kept badgering him about getting this rough mix of the album so he could listen to his three songs from his company, Big Seven Music. He was just a real person. We never talked about the Beatles. I never asked him, what was it like during that, or that wasn't part of why we were there, why we were together. I didn't ask him for an autograph. I didn't ask him for the picture that Bob Gruen took of us in Sloppy Louie's. I didn't even know who Bob Gruen was. That was the first time I'd met him, when he came in and John had asked him to take a picture. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a note from somebody in John's office saying, John thought you might like this picture from one of your lunches.
Oh,
He was a very thoughtful person.
yeah. And very dedicated to be there every single day, even when he wasn't called upon to testify.
Exactly. He and Yoko attended 20 days of the trial. And he didn't have to be there every day. And neither did she, but he called me. I was staying in a hotel in New York because I had too long a commute out to my home in New Jersey. So I was in a hotel during the trial. And he called me at midnight the night before the trial and said, can Yoko come to the trial? And I said, oh, of course. And I said, I'm sorry, I would have invited her. Because this was when Sean was about 3 months old. And I said, yes, she can come. And they showed up the next day, picked me up in their limo with my colleague, Howard Roy, and they came every day.
Yeah. Tell one of my favorite stories, and it was so thoughtful of you to do this, because I don't think a lot of people at that point really, everybody knows John's story now, but in the 1970s, a lot of people didn't know his teenage and college years. But you knew that he went to Liverpool College of Art. And so you took him on a special outing to see an extraordinary building. Tell us that story.
Well, we came out of the first day of the deposition when Morris's lawyers were taking his deposition. And we were down on 43rd Street and Madison Avenue in New York. And I thought, well, I said to him, look, why don't we just go over to Grand Central Station and we can have lunch at the Oyster Bar, which was on the lower level there. Very famous seafood restaurant in New York City. And he said, I've never been in Grand Central Station. And I said, well, you're in for a treat, because I knew as an artist, he would appreciate this amazing building and the room inside and the way it was decorated. And he was fascinated with it. And then the next day of the deposition, after the woman stopped us and called him George Harrison, I asked him if we wanted to have lunch because the deposition was over. We were finished. And he said, well, I better go home because, Yoko's pregnant and she's in bed. This was in May of 75. And as we got closer to the Waldorf, he said, well, yeah, let's have lunch. And I said, well, let's go into the Waldorf Astoria. There's a neat kind of pub called the Bull and the Bear. And he said, well, I've never been in the Waldorf Astoria. So we went in the main entrance, up across through this spectacular Art Deco lobby, and then down to the Bull and the Bear, where he was greeted by the maitre d', who was this kind of tall, kind of middle-aged Irishman who reached out and grabbed his hand and he said, "It's a pleasure to meet you." Shook his hand and John said, "It's a pleasure to meet you also."
Oh, I love it. Well, we have so many people who are waiting to ask you questions. So let's see it. Our Jeff Emmerich is going to navigate us over to the Q&A. And let's see. Vito would like to know, Jay, is Morris the same guy that ran Roulette Records?
Yes. Morris founded Roulette Records in 1956. He was also the manager of Alan Freed, who was the famous disc jockey who came from Cleveland in the early 50s. Yes.
And I believe you said in another show that I had listened to, or maybe it was one that we did with Bob Wilson last week, did you say you had been to some of Alan Freed's shows before?
Yes. Well, I was in high school from 1951 to 1955, and I had a friend, Andy Moen, and I would go to the shows either at the Fabian's Fox or the Brooklyn Paramount. And I didn't know at the time that not only was Morris, Alan Freed's manager, but he was also the promoter of these shows.
Wow. That's amazing. Of course, I think most people have seen American Hot Wax, which you can only see now on YouTube, and it's very scratchy and breaks up and everything. But you were there. You were there. It's so exciting to know someone who was actually at those shows.
Yes.
It's a classic. Okay, Ed Hartnett says, what was the percentage of cases you won as a lawyer in your career?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean,
a lot.
If you're gonna try cases, be a trial lawyer and try cases, you're gonna lose cases and you're gonna win cases. I never kept track of anything like that. Didn't have time to.
Right. No, you don't. You do not. That's right. Dara Roberts wants to know, did you and John stay friends after his case was closed?
No, I didn't see John after that. It was interesting. John, Morris's lawyers tried to get John when he was cross-examining him, to say that he and Morris were very close friends. And John said, I just thought he was a character. I think it takes a long time to have really close friends, and I don't count many people in that category.
Yeah, I agree. If you have one, you're blessed.
Yes.
You're really blessed.
Yeah.
Dara follows up by saying, what's your favorite John Lennon song?
Help.
Why?
I think it tells how even in the early years, John realized that this Beatlemania had gotten completely out of control, and that they had no control over their lives. And one of the things he told me, in I think one of our walks through Central Park, that he did not really be a father to Julian, and he didn't want that to happen with whatever this child was that was going to be born sometime in 1975, and he just wanted. I mean, the last day of the counterclaims, when John's part in the role in the case was over, he had testified, he'd done a great job, that was it. He didn't even come to the final argument the next day because he told me, I don't want to hear any more of Shertman's and Levy's lies. And secondly, I want to take over taking care of Sean. And that's what he did.
Yeah, definitely. Ed Hartnett says, what happened to Morris Levy after the trial? Did he just disappear into obscurity, or?
Oh, no. Morris kept, Morris kept going. He also owned that chain of record stores up and through New England called Strawberries. But in 1986, he was indicted by a federal grand jury in Newark. I think there were 17 members of the Genovese crime family that were indicted along with Morris as a result of a huge investigation by the federal government into their role in the record industry, the mafia's role in the record industry. And in 1989, Morris was convicted of attempted extortion along with one of the soldiers from the Genovese crime family. He appealed the decision. He was sentenced to 10 years and a $200,000 fine. He appealed the decision. He lost. And 2 months before he was supposed to surrender and go to prison, he died of colon cancer.
Wow.
He was 62 years old.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I would say that sounds young to me.
It is.
Thank you. Very young, very young.
Younger every day.
Scott wants to know, what was your impression of Bob Dylan during that case?
Well, I took Bob's deposition, and through the case, the Lennon case, this was a few years after the Lennon case was over, and I had met Jim Keltner, who played on a number of John's albums, but he also played on Bob's albums when he went into that Jesus period. Remember, he made a couple of albums, sure, and was touring. And he had told me that Bob was a very difficult guy to deal with. Very, very difficult. And every time I asked him a question that day in the deposition, he ended it by saying, "Sir." No, I don't remember that, "Sir." And I don't know what the purpose of that was. I don't know whether he was trying to unnerve me or what. But Bob is a very strange guy. I mean, I've heard a lot of stories. I mean, Jimmy Iovine, the famous producer, has some great stories about Dylan.
Yeah, he came to Monroe, Louisiana, which, by the way, is the city that's hosting the John Lennon birthday party this coming weekend. It's the longest running John Lennon birthday party in America. We started it the year before John passed, and Yoko was twice recognized. It's a big deal, lots of live bands and all this stuff. And anyway, Bob played a concert there. Well, we were going to have a big party afterwards, and they had advertised Bob Dylan after party. Well, Bob was driving down the main drag where the pub is, saw the sign, had his driver pull into the back of the pub, told him to go get someone to come out. And he said, "I don't want that sign up there." And they said, you don't want Bob Dylan after party? Nope, I want that taken down. Well, we're honoring you. We were going to play all your, nope, take it down. No. So they did.
Well, I had a fellow I represented who was Stu Kimball, who was in a band called Face to Face, and I helped them get a record deal in the 80s. They were in a movie with Diane Lane when she was 18 years old called Streets of Fire, and which has now become kind of a cult classic.
Yep.
But Stu played with Bob for 15 years, and he told me that Bob had these very odd rules, like when the show was over, the band had to stand in back of Bob and not smile. They couldn't bow. They couldn't smile. They were just supposed to stand there. And Bob had one bus with a woman who was an assistant of his, and I think that the tour manager or his regular manager, he would go off in this big bus, and then everybody else would pile into a second bus when they were on the road.
Oh my gosh. Very strange. Very unique, shall we say. Unique.
Yes.
Okay,
That's right.
Cynthia Serto says, "Hey Jay, I met you at the fest in Chicago. Whatever happened to Morris Levy's lawyer after the trial? And did you ever have any other cases with him?"
No, but there was a book written in 2010 or 2011 by a professor of music and popular music at a college in Denver. I think it was a part of the University of Colorado. And there's a page in there where Shirtman talks about how he took John's deposition. And John showed up in torn jeans and a torn t-shirt, and his hair was dirty and greasy, and he didn't answer any questions, and it was a complete lie. He did not take John's deposition. One of the reasons that he was so ill-prepared for the trial was he turned the whole preparation for the trial over to a younger partner who had only been a partner for a short period of time. And then he came in at the last minute and tried to, try the case. You can't do that. You can't do that. It's like you and Lanea, not preparing for this show tonight.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. And I'm going to put that on my website very soon, where I'm going to show the part that he quoted about just lying about who John was and how he acted at the trial.
Right, and he was meticulously dressed. His tie that he's showing in that one picture at Sloppy Louie's is very avant-garde, but he has on a tie. His hair was cut. That was a shock to you, the haircut.
Yes, it was.
But he never did. Was he looking sloppy?
No, and he answered every question. And I have to tell you about the tie. The tie he bought at a secondhand store on the Upper West Side, and it was a hand-painted tie. And if you can really get a good look at it, it's a butterfly caught in a spider's web. And I said to him, "What's the deal with the tie?" And he said, "Well, I'm the butterfly, and I'm caught in Morris Levy's spider's web, and I'm going to wear this tie every day of the trial."
Oh my goodness. Oh, I love that. I love it. Well, Tom Aguiar, I don't know if you've met Tom yet, but he and Robin Roberts run Octopus's Garden fanzine. It's the oldest one, I think, in existence. There may be some older in Europe, but I know in America it is. And Lena's showing the picture. Say something, Lena, so your face will come up on the screen.
Oh, okay. So this is the photo that Jay was referencing from Sloppy Louie's.
Yes. Yep. Bob Gruen took it. And the other thing, Lena, is that after that first day, when we got in the limo for the lunch break, the first day of the trial, I said to John, what do you want to eat? And he said, "We're only eating fish." And I told the limo driver, I asked him to take us down near the East River where the old Fulton Fish Market was. And I knew there were a number of terrific seafood restaurants there, old ones. And we pulled up in Sloppy Louie's, in front of Sloppy Louie's, and it was kind of a dump, but great seafood, great Italian food. And we ate there every day for 20 days.
Ooh, I hope they had a wide assortment of dishes.
Well, and
Calamari, I think, was the favorite.
And I tell the story in the beginning of the book about how 20 years later, I took a client there in 1996, and I hadn't been in Sloppy Louie's since the trial. And I saw the Red Album up on the wall, signed by John. And I asked the cashier, what's the story with the Lennon album, with the Lennon autograph? He said, "Oh, years ago, John and Yoko used to come in here every day with a bunch of lawyers. And after they stopped coming in with the lawyers, they would come back themselves. So I guess they liked the food."
Yeah, they did. Those are some happy memories, those lunches. I love that part of the book. Well, I was telling you about Tom and Octopus's Garden fanzine, and you two need to get together because I bet he would love to do an interview with you for the magazine. But his question is, when reading John's testimony, I didn't get the impression of a brash rock and roller, the one that we had known. I got the impression of a craftsman explaining his craft with respect and reverence. Was this obvious to you in the courts?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, John never lost his temper. Once or twice, Shertman would ask a question on cross-examination, and John might snap at him, like, how do you know that the public was confused about the two albums? And John went into that. I quote it right in the beginning of the book there, that, yeah, I know because I walk around the city. I got in a taxi cab and the driver said to me, John, I bought the wrong album. So John was he was the best witness I ever had.
Wow.
He was very clear in his testimony. He had a great sense of humor. And he rarely forgot anything that we had talked about. So we spent a lot of time going over the areas that I was going to question him about. So he knew exactly where we were going.
And that's hard to do with Mr. Shertman jumping up every few minutes. And I love the image that, and Scott really carries it out so well, of Shertman talking through his mouth. He always talks like that. And then
that was a running joke that John and I had, because the plaintiffs in a case sit in the front table. So they're between you and us and the judge. And, sometimes I couldn't hear him. So I'd stand up and say, Mr. Shertman, I can't hear you. And then I would turn around a little bit and look back at John, and he would just, kind of stare at me.
And Judge Grease, you could tell Judge Grease was getting fed up with it as well.
Oh, he was. Yeah. He told me a couple of times, that's enough.
I know.
That's enough.
It's so annoying. Well, Carol Gasquire has several questions. She wants to know, first of all, when are you going to do a hard copy of the book? And then how did you get the transcripts for the book? Did you receive the full transcript after the trial, for the whole trial?
Well, in a trial like that, the court reporters with their little stenotype machines, they rotate in and out of the courtroom during the day. And so that night, it's automatic, unless you tell them you don't want it, but you do want it. You get what they call daily copy. They will deliver the copy of the day's transcript to you at usually 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, so that you can have it for the next day. So when the trial ended, I had the entire transcript, in my possession. And then when the appeal went forward, the entire trial record and all of the exhibits had to be printed in what they call a record on appeal. So I had the transcript twice, and then all of the exhibits, and plus I retained the exhibits that we used of Beatles and John Lennon albums to show the care that he took in preparing albums.
Yeah, it's interesting, Lanea, that you mentioned the difference in the two covers, because that's one of the big parts of the trial. Is John is horrified by that Roots cover, and then there's the beautiful rock and roll cover. So I mean, you nailed it.
Well, and John's testimony was, as we quote in the book, the cover was cheesy. The photo of me was awful.
It looked like it was from K-Tel Records.
Yes, it did. It did. Well, and also on the back, he advertised two other albums of his, greatest soul hits or whatever it was. I mean, nobody did that.
No.
Particularly the Beatles.
No. So, well, we'll do one last question, then we'll get to our trivia questions. But Cindy wants to know, you described Yoko as businesslike during the Yoko audition chapter. Did you ever see a different side to her than the businesswoman?
Yes.
You want to just say yes?
That's
leave it at that.
That's all.
Are we still on air?
I think that's a lawyer's answer.
I like it. I like it. Or I will say thank you very much, Jay, for that answer. But I won't jump up.
No, I will say one thing. Throughout the trial and all these lunches and the limo rides and the times I went up to the to the Dakota, to get ready for depositions and other things. Yoko never interfered. She never said you should do this or do that or you shouldn't. There was one time when we had the mistrial that day, and when I came back from the chief judge's chambers asking for another judge, she said, I was talking to the two of them in the courtroom. They had waited for me. And I said, look, we're going to get another judge. And she said something like, well, this shouldn't have happened, or this is wrong or something. And John said to her, Yoko, Jay's in charge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those things happen. They just do, Before we get to the trivia, tell everyone, Jay, where they can get your book and how they can follow you on social media.
Well, they can get it on my website, which is Lennon, the mobster, and AND, thelawyer.com. They can also get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. My social media is I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And if you just go Jay Bergen, John Lennon, that will pop up.
Great.
There's a lot of I have this recent college graduate who is just a Haley McCraw, who is just a whiz at the social media. And there's really a lot of fascinating information and pieces of evidence from the trial that are on the website and the social media.
I noticed, I don't know if Haley did the posting about this webinar on your Facebook page, but it was brilliant.
Yes.
Just brilliant. So,
yeah.
And Scott said he will send a link to the audiobook after the discussion. So,
Type it in right
yeah.
now if he wants to type it in on there.
Yeah, he could do that or send it. However, Scott, you want to do that, just let us know. We'll wait to hear from you. All right, Lena, I will turn it over to you for our trivia questions. We have 3, and the first one is for a copy of Shades of Life, Part 1, which if you don't want to read it, you can work out with it. You can get some very good bicep work with this book, or maybe some shoulder work. So
you gave me a copy of it, and when we were in Chicago, and I appreciate that. And it's a fascinating book. Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, Lena, take it away.
Okay, so the first person that correctly answers the trivia question will be the winner of Shades of Life.
And you guys type it in your chat, because Rand and I are looking. We're watching.
All right. In his illustrious career, Jay served as the litigator in a case between Grand Funk Railroad and the founder and manager of the band. What was his name?
Ooh, that's hard. Yes, Amy. Amy got it.
Ding, 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 ding. That was fast.
Terry Knight. Amy, if you already have this book and you would prefer to have a John Lennon t-shirt that Rand drew, he's a remarkable artist. He did the cover work for this book. So if you'd rather have the John Lennon t-shirt or a Beatles t-shirt, we can send you that. If you would please reach out to me on Messenger with your address, we will get you a copy of that book. Okay, Lena, go, go, go.
Okay, our next prize is a candle. It's backwards, but it's Strawberry Fields flavor. It is from Deep Groove Candle Company. Okay, our question is, during the Roots trial with Morris Levy, John and Yoko's professional photographer friend was often present, and he took photos in the courtroom as well as at many lunches that John, Jay, Yoko, Cindy, that they took at Sloppy Louie's. That famous photographer wrote the foreword for Jay's book. Lennon, the mobster, and the lawyer. Who?
Okay,
was?
I think that Tom Aguiar was the first person and John Bazzini was next. They were both
Okay.
at 8:41. So if you will send the candle to Tom, John, we will send you another prize and it will be a good prize because y'all tied. Y'all were exactly at the same time. So congratulations to you both.
Very, very astute tonight.
Yes, yes.
Okay, last question for a copy of Recipe Records, a culinary tribute to the Beatles. One of the songs that we discussed tonight, a song that appeared on the Rock and Roll LP, was labeled by John as one of my all-time favorite songs. And John was quoted as saying that he wished he had written this song. Which song was it? Ding, ding.
No, it didn't be Bapalula.
That was it.
Whoop,
Somebody got it. Somebody
got
got it.
Oh, yeah, Carol Gasquire. Good job, Carol. Bring it on home to me. So, Carol, I don't know if you
Carol.
all have her wonderful
I think she
culinary
has all my-
tribute to the
It was
Beatles.
a tie.
Oh, it was a tie.
842 with Rod.
Okay, Rod, it's Rod
Rod.
Switzer, I believe. Rod, we will make sure that you get a prize. So, because y'all are
Yeah.
right at the exact same time. Thank you, everybody. We've had such a great audience and so many wonderful questions. Yay!
Oh, it's been a very remarkable evening, and I have completely enjoyed myself, and always lovely to be here with Jude and to talk about John. And even though George was my Beatle, but it's
I'm trying to win her over. I've done the best I
he is
can.
trying, and I'm getting there. It does give me goosebumps when I read Jay's book and he talks about his conversations. He recalls the conversations with John. It is stirring, and it's very emotional. So thank you, Jay, for penning this wonderful, wonderful book. We are just very fortunate to have this in the Beatle world now.
Well, thank you, Lanea. I really appreciate that.
It was,
We
it was,
appreciate
That's why I wrote this book, so that people would know this different John Lennon.
this is a lens that we have not had to view John through, and Jude does a fantastic job of getting out all of these experiences that he had, and she researches tooth and nail to get the bottom of all the accurate facts. And your book provides a whole new point in his life, and your chapter on that fateful day is very emotional. So thank you for sharing that.
Scott McKinley typed into the chat that he had to record that 3 times because it was really too hard to record. So, and I've heard Jay talk about it, and you feel the same way, Jay. But
Yes.
you know what? We've said John Lennon a million times tonight, and we keep saying it. So he is very.
And we celebrate him on his birthday, and he was a kind soul.
He was.
Jay, thank you for giving your time tonight. We really appreciate it so much.
Well, I appreciate very much being able to talk about it, and with the two of you, it was great fun, terrific fun.
Thank you.
Well, we Bob Wilson and I got to talk with Jay on Tomorrow Never Knows. If you check that on Facebook, and we're going to do part 2. And we'll be talking this Sunday about things that we did not cover tonight or last week. We're going to talk about John's opinion of his birthday, for one thing. And so tune in. And Scott McKinley says, thank you, Jay. You are the best. Everybody is saying they have been inspired. So we do very much appreciate it. And before we go tonight, one more time, an invitation to join us Friday evening, not Saturday, but Friday, October the 7th, at Enoch's Irish Pub. You know, John very much considered himself an Irish artist. He had bought an island in Ireland and planned to retire there. He had lobbied with the guy that wrote Irish Artist to be recognized as an Irish artist. So it is a perfect place to meet at Enoch's Irish Pub. Friday night, live music with Josh Madden and so many other bands. And we will be celebrating his birthday. Hope you can all be there in Monroe, Louisiana for cake and a toast to John and a chance to remember this unique and creative soul. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Josephine.
Jude, I wish I could be there.
I wish you could too. Next year, you need to come and give the toast to John and be our master of ceremonies.
Okay.
All right.
I'll be there
All right.
too.
All right.
And everybody, Dara mentioned prayers for Ringo.
Yes, definitely. Going
Yes.
through COVID. We will keep him in our hearts. Well, thank you, everyone. And Lena?
Right. Until we meet again, here's to food for thought, food for the soul, and food for the love of rock and roll.
Ta-ra and
Thank you.
shine on.